Hi, I'm William Stewart, co-founder of Teleios. Welcome back to our verse-by-verse study on the book of Matthew. We start chapter 19. Today, Christ begins his journey back to Jerusalem for the final time for his unjust, horrific death on the cross, and then, of course, his glorious resurrection. Let's go to the text. And it came to pass when Jesus finished these sayings, verse chapter 18, he departed from Galilee again for the last time, came to the coast of Judea beyond the Jordan, otherwise to the east side of the Jordan River, which runs from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea. Great multitudes followed him, and he healed them. Then the Pharisees came to him, tempting him. So again, this is a trick of the Pharisees. They're trying to get him in a gotcha moment. They've done this in terms of the disciples picking grain on the Sabbath, Christ healing on the Sabbath. In Matthew 12, we'll see this again. They want to cause him to stumble in what he says, so he would be shown impure, unrighteous, and obviously then not Messiah. They ask, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? Christ says, have you not read that he made them in the beginning, male and female? For this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the twain shall be one flesh. Therefore no more twain, but one flesh. What God hath joined together, let no man turn asunder. So he's quoting Genesis 2, verse 24, as in terms of his answer. And they said, well, Moses said you can give a writing of divorcement in Deuteronomy, as I remember, to put her away. Moses, because of hardness in your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives, suffer being allowed you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. Interesting, I could be missing this, but I don't know of another incident in Scripture where God, with the law, relationship to the law, God bent his will to allow someone to do something that was against the law or his intention. And so, if so, it's very rare. We know that when, in some instances where people came and pled and repented, God would reverse or limit a judgment or an action. But in this case, it seemed to be continued sin that God allowed some bending of his will. I don't know of another incident like this. So it shows the strong desire for men to put away their wives for any variety of reasons, which you could imagine. And we'll see this again down in the verse. And I say unto you, verse 19, or 9, whoever shall put his away for his wife, except for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And who marrieth her, and also who marries her, is put away, does also commit adultery. Otherwise, when the woman is put away and she marries somebody else, otherwise, if she leaves her husband, goes and marries somebody else, he too, the new husband's committing adultery. Wow, so that's a big change. So I don't think the Pharisees like this, and but was also reiterated, also said this in the Sermon on the Mount in chapter 5. Okay, now as we've talked about, this is the gospel time. This is what they were to do during that time. How about now in the church time? Well, this is very controversial. And so you're going to have to look at this yourself and come to your own decision. What do the epistles, otherwise those books from Romans to Revelation 3, say to us about marriage? Well, foremostly, marriage is extremely important to God, and that commitment to the point, and I think this is the high point of what the epistles say about marriage in Ephesians 5. The marriage contract reflects the relationship between Christ and the church. As Christ is committed to the church and love her and sanctifies her, so the man does to the woman. And we reflect Christ in the church. Otherwise, that commitment is to go unbroken. And we represent God and Christ and his people to the world. Otherwise, the main purpose of marriage, the main point of marriage is the gospel. Okay, now people get married for all sorts of reasons, but Christians should be getting married to help better their testimony and to look at their marriage that way. Now, 1 Corinthians 7, the first portion, about the first half of this chapter talks about marriage, and it says basically in 12, let's see, to 16, that, 10 to 11, I give this, the Lord gives this command: a wife must not separate from her husband. If she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. The husband must not divorce his wife. So basically, once you have made that commitment, even if you leave, it remains unbroken in God's eyes. Now, 12 to 16, he does say, if a brother has a wife who's not a believer and she's willing to live with him, he should stay with her. But not a believer, and but if an unbeliever leaves, let it be so. A brother or a sister is not bound in such circumstances. So in that case, it seems that there wasn't really a contract that mirrored Christ in the church, because the Christian was married to an unbeliever. And so they can let that person go. Now, can they remarry? It doesn't really specifically say. So again, you'll have to think about this yourself. My sense is it probably would allow this. But for a Christian, we are not to separate or not to divorce our husband or wife who's a Christian. Now, how about in the church where you're considering somebody for leadership? 1 Timothy 3:2 says that they are to be a one-woman man. And Titus 1 repeats this. So for eldership. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean they've always been married to just one woman and they've gotten a divorce that disqualifies them? And some people believe this. Or if the divorce happens, they've broken that covenant relationship and married a second person, that sin has happened and it's over. And so they're a one-woman person with that second wife. Or is the sin continual despite the second wife? Another controversial point. So this would take careful consideration among the elder board. Probably, and maybe every case is different. And again, probably each church should decide for themselves, is it a continual sin or is it not? Main point, though, that Christ is saying, marriage, God takes very seriously and is a binding covenant. It was true in the Gospels, except for adultery, and it's true in the New Testament. Interestingly, that doesn't mention adultery. So for two believers, they are together. If a Christian is married to an unbeliever, you can let that person go. And maybe there's a case for remarriage. All right. So perhaps some tough words, but it reflects what Christ thinks about marriage as being gospel, reflecting the relationship between Christ and the church to the world. So it's a very serious relationship that people make with each other. Thank you for joining me today. I will look forward to seeing you next time.